Philippine power supply remains sufficient in the second quarter of 2026, but this 700 to 800 megawatts in forced outages threatens reserve stability. To explain this grid vulnerability, we have Jeffrey Manansala of ICSC, Maria Teresa Capellan of PSSEA, and Gerard Arances of SEED. Welcome, Jeffrey, Mtechi, and Gerard. Let's begin with where this is coming from. What is causing reserve fragility despite sufficient projected power capacity?
From our analysis, the issue is not insufficient power capacity, but too much of the inflexible kind. Approximately 66% of the dependable capacity today is locked into rigid baseload plants designed to operate at a constant optimal level. However, what the grid requires today is flexibility, especially during afternoon or evening peak demands. And because flexible resources today remain limited in the grid, the system operators are forced to cycle these coal plants up and down. And they are not designed to do this daily ramping. And we see this operation across majority of the coal plants today. And this cycling operation increases the risk of forced outages and reduces the available reserves when they are needed the most. We also see that the power capacities that can theoretically provide the flexibility that the system needs. Lastly, we see that the market signals that should encourage flexibility are weakened. Price distortions such as secondary price cap in the WESM suppress the scarcity signal pricing during these critical periods. And this reduces incentives for investments in flexible capacity like storage and peakers, which are exactly the resources needed to stabilize reserves during this stress in the system.
The Philippine grid is really reacting on seasonal behavior of the demand and supply. Basically, the cooling requirements of the Philippines, where heat temperature rises to as much as 35 to 40, requires more demand as a result of cooling requirements. So what is happening here is that the reserve supply has to respond to the increased demand during that seasonal period, basically summer. And if you look at the statistics of the market supply and demand, you will see that the demand increases, demand for more energy increases starting in the month of February through March, April, and May. So that is a 4-month increase in the demand from the grid. So that kind of seasonal requirements or spike in the seasonal behavior of the grid demand will force some red alert and yellow alerts. So that seasonality really pushes the reserve requirement to its very thin reserve.
From seeds end, we actually look at this as a clear violation of many of the unplanned outages by both coal plants and gas plants, as well as a combination of the grid being unable to actually deploy the necessary power because of technical difficulties. A deeper concern on this matter because it has been a feature for almost the last 10 years, and succeeding investigations by the Energy Regulatory Commission, including that of oversight committees, mainly by the Senate in previous years, shows that there is an issue on the gaming in the power sector.
So considering this, how vulnerable would you say is the grid to global LNG supply disruptions and fuel price swings?
In the Philippines, a large capacity of electricity generation comes from imported fuels such as coal and gas. Coal, approximately 60% of mix, gas increasingly higher, about 10 to 15%. And because these fuels are globally traded commodities, their prices are exposed to international market movements, geopolitical shocks, and supply chain disruptions. And this exposure is amplified by the way long-term power supply agreements are structured in the Philippines, because many of these coal and gas contracts include automatic fuel pass-through provisions, which directly transfer the volatility in international fuel prices to the domestic electricity pricing.
Well, basically, the mix of the reserve requirements right now is very much dependent on diesel run um, power plants. So, what happens is that during the time of the summer, the most of the ancillary services are supplied by gas, not necessarily LNG, but more the diesel run plants that are some are LNG, some are not, but they're basically diesel. Um, the other reserve requirements of the grid are contracted from hydro, but the problem with hydro is that during the time of summer, the hydro plants have a very low capacity because by nature water evaporates, and so there are lesser capacity that you can rely from clean energy. So then the demand for diesel really increases. So what becomes a possible alternative to that essentially would be the solar power plants that ramp up in the morning, starts at 6 and is still supplied, solar is still supplied in the late afternoon.
And that is the feature of the rotating brownouts, right? And once rotating brownouts and supply will actually be withdrawn through unplanned shutdowns, surges in prices will actually be manifested in the spot market. And so those electric cooperatives and distribution utilities that one rely heavy on the spot market for their electricity requirements will actually bear the brunt, and it will eventually be passed on to electric consumers. So high prices of electricity will actually really be manifested, especially during rotating brownouts.
As experts on the topic, we would also love to know your recommendations. So, what actions are most urgent to strengthen long term grid resilience?
So first, upholding and operationalizing the coal moratorium is important. The Philippines has already had a coal-dominated system, and this is the key source of inflexibility and reliability risk that we are experiencing today. While the existing coal plants cannot be retired overnight, avoiding new capacity additions is critical given that there's already more than enough baseload capacity in the system today. The priority should be to stop locking in further inflexible assets that might worsen the rigidity of the system over time. Second, what we need is to diversify towards indigenous energy resources, particularly renewable energy. This reduces exposure to imported fuel prices, volatility, and supply chain disruptions from global coal and gas trade. And third, the geographic diversification is essential because the Philippines is an archipelagic system. Grid resilience depends on spreading this generation across the multiple islands of the Philippines and load centers.
There are two possibilities. One is you upgrade the grid and you improve its, or you change also the regulations so that you will contract more reserve during the summertime so that the red and the yellow alerts do not happen as frequently. That is a market solution. The other is on a policy perspective, you promote distributed energy where you distribute the demand across different sector, which means you distribute it to the residential, you distribute it to the commercial and industrial. So solar rooftop would be a very, I should say, cost competitive technology solutions.
If you ask us, there is immediate, intermediate, and strategic solutions, but I will, with the current predicaments, especially in the yellow and red alert situation, there are several measures that we are actually already proposing and engaging the Philippine government, including the Energy Regulatory Commission. One is, to increase the penalties, really for this behavior of unplanned shutdowns, because the accountability of those corporations behind the unplanned shutdown should actually be bearing the brunt of that, and not just be passed on to electric consumers. So that's one. The second element to this is really the modernization of the grid and a combination of developing the national grid to make sure that absorbing, expanding renewable energy capacity will actually be prioritized and absorbed by the national grid. So modernizing it would be a very crucial step. The third element to the solutions really is to make sure that distributed renewable energy, starting with solar rooftop PV systems.
Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and for joining us today, Jeffrey, Techi, and Gerard.
Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you for having me.
Once again, those were Jeffrey Manansala, Chief Data Scientist at the Institute for Climate and Sustainable Cities, Maria Teresa Techi Capellan, Chairperson at the Philippine Solar and Storage Energy Alliance, and Gerard Arances, Executive Director at the Center for Energy, Ecology, and Development. For more news, visit asian-power.com.